Welcome to We the People's Forum. This is a Braver Angels event where everyday Americans get time at the podium. My name is David Lapp. I'm a co-founder of Braver Angels. I live in South Lebanon, Ohio, just north of Cincinnati. And I'm also the director of We the People's Project. This event is brought to you by We the People's Project, which is an initiative at Braver Angels to bring a working class focus to the issues of the day. And so we try to look at the issues of the day and say, okay, well, how are everyday Americans being affected by these issues? And let's hear from everyday Americans on these issues. So you can learn more about our project at braverangels.org/WPP. Our forum tonight is, does America need a new labor movement? And our goals are a better understanding of the experiences and perspectives of some of our fellow Americans on that question, to discuss some areas of common ground in addition to acknowledging and respecting our differences, and then to learn something that might be helpful to others in our country. So we're going to start out this conversation with, we have three first speakers that we're going to hear from, and I'll introduce them to you in just a moment. And then after that, basically the first half of the conversation with our first speakers, we're then going to open it up to everyone in the audience, and we invite you, we call it Q&A time, questions and experiences. Feel free, you might have a question for one of the speakers, or you might have your own perspective on the question. What are some life experiences that have shaped your perspective on the question, does America need a new labor movement? And we're going to call on a politically balanced group of people in the audience at that point, red, blue, and people who don't lean either way. So our ground rules for this, We the People's Forum, are basically the same as our ground rules for Braver Angels workshops. And basically we're here to understand others and to explain our views, not to convince anyone to change their mind. We speak for ourselves and don't try to represent any outside group. We stick to the spirit of the activities designed for each stage of the meeting. And otherwise, it's standard stuff we all know. Taking turns, not interrupting others, listening to everyone, being respectful, and bringing our best selves to the conversation. So our speakers for tonight are Mark Dow. Mark, if you could just wave at us there. Mark is from Louisville, Kentucky, and he is a regional leader for the UAW, which of course has been much in the news recently. So we're very honored that you took time to join us for this tonight, Mark.
Thank you.
Chris Griswold Chris, if you could wave at us. Chris is the policy director at American Compass, which is a conservative think tank. And he previously worked as a senior advisor to Senator Marco Rubio in the U.S. Senate. And then Maureen May. Maureen, if you could wave to us. Maureen is a registered nurse and the president of PASNEP, which is a Pennsylvania Nurses Union. And right now, we have a co-moderator for tonight. A co-moderator with me is Jerry Silverman. Jerry is going to begin by just providing a little bit of orientation to our conversation tonight. Jerry is a longtime student of the labor union movements and himself has been involved in several labor unions and now works as a labor organizer. So Jerry, over to you to tee us up for our discussion, orient us to what we're talking about tonight. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Jerry.
Good evening, everybody. Just a little background for this discussion. The labor movement, since its birth shortly after the Civil War, has been at the center of movements for democracy and respect for the ordinary working people of our country. The movement asserted that honest, hard work deserved respect and economic security, and that money was never the measure of a person's goodness or virtue. From its beginning, it has been hated by the wealthy elite of this nation, who claim the opposite, that the accumulation of wealth or college degrees confirmed one's superiority and right to rule our country. Many workers died in the fight to establish their rights when bosses used private armies as well as police to crush workers' struggles. The labor movement, like any human organization, is embedded in its society's values and faults. Most early labor unions limited their members to white men, but others led the fight for complete economic and social equality without regard to race from their foundations, such as the Knights of Labor, the United Mine Workers, and the CIO. In the first decades of the 20th century, union support for working women contributed towards winning them the vote. And in the 60s, the labor movement provided important support to the civil rights movement. The American labor movement surged from the 30s to the 40s, 30s to the 60s. At its peak, 40% of wage workers were union members. And in major industries such as auto, steel, coal mining, electrical equipment, railroads, and clothing, the rates of union membership were north of 70%. For 50 years, union membership has been in decline, however. Some of the factors cited are corporate hostility and media misrepresentation, legal attacks on their rights, the changing structure of the economy away from manufacturing, and internal corruption. The labor movement was largely associated with the Democratic Party from the time of Roosevelt and for several decades. And it has been criticized for relying too much on the favors of politicians and not enough on the ability of the membership to organize for their own power. Today, union membership in this country is just under 10%. During this decline, the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few has increased to rival the 1890s and the 1920s. Those were terrible decades for workers, which gave birth to powerful unions and allied social movements. Is this happening again? Can it? Should it? That's our topic for this evening's discussion.
Very good. Thank you, Jerry. And we're going to begin with you, Mark. Mark is a regional leader for the UAW. And my question for you, Mark, is give us a sense of some life experiences that have shaped your perspective on the question, does America need a new labor movement? And take up the 5 minutes for this. Mark, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you, David. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on. I appreciate being a part of this group. So I hired in at Ford Motor Company in 1993. And 3 years after I hired in, I was already getting involved with the union, going to different political rallies, actually attending union meetings and doing different things like that. I decided I wanted to run for an office. So when I ran for office, I got more involved. I started helping out and seeing that there was a lot of people that truly needed help. That were out there on that floor, that were turning those wrenches day in and day out, standing on the concrete. Some of these jobs were hurting them. Some were having difficulties at home, and they were bringing that issues and stuff back into the plant, which was creating problems inside the workforce. So I learned that, it made me feel good to get involved, to be able to be like a middle person between the company and that person that having those issues, and talking to them and trying to work those issues out and getting a happy medium for both sides. And one of the things that we talked about with the company is when some of these employees were coming to work with issues that were going on at home, their productivity dropped, and therefore it cost the company a lot of money. So once you address those issues, productivity went back up, therefore the company making more profit instead of losing money in the process. So these are just some of the aspects that I seen as time went on. The more I was helping out these individuals, I wanted to do more. I wanted to get more involved. So I started getting involved in the politics and trying to learn why are certain politicians seem to be attacking unions and others seem to be wanting to stand with us. So I actually had conversations with Republicans and independents and Green Party and just different parties, trying to educate them and learning in the process that, most of our issues is just really a lack of education on both sides. It's not that, one side is just really attacking the other side because of one certain thing. I think that it's a lack of education of not knowing and being scared of the unknown. And I know as time has gone on and me sitting down with the politicians, After you have a good candid conversation, and if you're both like you talked about in this chat here, everybody needs to be open. Um, if you have an open conversation with a politician, you find out a lot of times they don't realize what you stand for and what you do. That you're there just to help out that member and to make that member feel appreciated when he comes into work and he gets to go home to his family safely. We all think we're asking for is a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, and that's what negotiations was all about. That's what we were in the news about when we went to the streets and we had to strike Ford Motor Company. Ford had made $20 billion, and we were just asking for a fair share at Ford Motor Company, and we finally reached that agreement. And in the meantime, while on the strike lines, we had politicians that wanted to come out and stand with us, and they wanted to actually talk to us. And that was something I found interesting is they actually was asking our members questions. Do you realize why you're out here? What are you fighting for? What is this going to do for you and stuff? And I was actually glad to see politicians asking these questions to my members and then hearing the responses of my members, how they were fired up and saying, look, if that's what we have to do, we need to be united, stand out here for a better contract. That's what we'll do. But we also had a few politicians too that I've reached out to and said, hey, love to have you come out, and they never did show up. So I will be having some conversations with them later on just to see what exactly happened. Why didn't you want to come out? Why didn't you want to be seen on that line? So but these are some of the experiences that I've experienced, and like I said, even our membership, we've got people on both sides of the aisle. And whenever I go to new hire orientation and get to talking to them, afterwards, I always have one or two come over and say, I didn't really agree with what you said, but I like what you said about unions and how, we're trying to just give you a better life, better health care, more money in your pocket, making this a career, not just a job. So it's all about educating each other and being open-minded.
And so, Mark, you've been involved in labor unions since you were how old?
Well, actually, my father was a president of a local union, so I was involved when I was even younger, and I kind of got my taste of that. But 1993 is when I hired in to Ford Motor Company and the UAW.
Gotcha. Your father, was he with UAW as well?
Yes, yes, he was, and so was my grandfather. So I'm a third generation.
Got it. And just in the time you have left, take about a minute. What would you say your basic response is to the question, does America need a new labor movement?
So I don't think we need a new labor movement. I think what it is we kind of gotten complacent in our positions and stuff. So I think that we just need to go back and look at ourselves again and figure out what is important and why are we here. And we need to be listening to our membership. We need to be representing our membership. We need to be out there and be accessible to our membership. And as far as organizing, I think too, I know when they were reading out, Jerry was reading that out earlier, how our membership has declined. If statistics are shown of recent, they're actually increasing. We had a lot of organizing going on. People are contacting our office on a daily basis, wanting to know how to go about organizing. So I think they see what this change has done, and people are wanting to be a part of this movement now.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark, and we'll hear more from you. Chris, let's go to you. What are some life experiences that have shaped your perspective on this question?
That's a fun question to get for someone who works in Washington, D.C. and is always talking about statistics and policy and all that kind of thing. One of the reasons I love Braver Angels so much is you guys focus on what really matters, on the human level of all of this. So I grew up without a lot. Like, we were always taken care of, but we were not living in luxury, right? We, got shop for my clothes at the Goodwill and never had health insurance when a major medical crisis came, which would happen to my family a couple of times. it took me a long time before I realized once I got older, like how good a job my mom did at like shielding her children from like the reality of like how close to the edge we often really were. Um, moms are good at that. Um, and like I said, we always had enough, but the reason we always had enough is because we were in a whenever we had a real crisis, it was the church community that was there to help and to step in. My dad was a preacher. They didn't make a lot, but when we needed something, the community was there. I remember one church in like a rich neighborhood one year like banded together to donate a bunch of stuff so that like, me and my sister had like a big nice Christmas kind of a thing. So like I said, we were always all right, but it was also always kind of sort of at someone else's mercy, right? A little bit of dependent on someone else's charity. And on the other hand, I always thought that like to be truly self-reliant, to be truly self-sufficient, I would have to do that on my own. You could depend on the community, but in this kind of disempowered way, or you could depend on yourself and your own ability to like master the universe and make something of yourself by yourself. And I think that attitude is something about growing up in America that kind of teaches you to blame yourself a little bit for your own struggles, and that if you're having a tough time, it's because you didn't make something of yourself alone. Um, and I think for me, sooner or later, like I realized that neither one of those mindsets really spoke to like my deep longing for a sense of dignity. Of course, we all need the community's help sometimes, and that's good. And of course, there are times we do need to stand on our own 2 feet alone. But ultimately, I don't think either one of those really speaks to that deep longing of the human spirit for dignity. And it also, as it turns out, as I came to learn as I grew up, it's also not enough to ensure that we're actually doing okay economically. We all want agency, we all want the ability to speak and act for ourselves, but we can't do that alone. Certainly not in our economic life, certainly not at work. We need the ability to speak collectively in the workplace. We need it. And growing up, it never even occurred to me that I could have that kind of feeling of agency and self-sufficiency and that feeling of community like at the same time. That they could be those two halves of the equation could actually be joined together into one solution, which is our worker organizations that do provide community, but not because they're giving you a handout. They're helping you stand up for yourself, which you can only do together. And we've seen the consequence. Now I will get a little bit DC if I can, because we've seen the consequences of the labor movement's diminishment, because as it's lost power over the last several decades, we've seen the negative consequences of that. Like I think since 1980, I think corporate profits have risen like 185%, and real wages for workers like about 1%. Like there's something deeply wrong with like how we're sharing our prosperity in the U.S. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, as both Mark and Jerry have said, the labor movement's had struggles in recent years, and there are a lot of reasons for that we can get into. So do I think we need a new labor movement? I think I would say we need a renewed labor movement. We used to have a labor movement that worked pretty well. It's had struggles, some of which I think are not its fault, and some of which I think have to do with labor's own choices, at least the DC bosses and some of the unions. So I think the labor movement needs to change in some ways, but I think we need it to be renewed and restored and strengthened, because without it, we've seen the consequences, and it's not good. It's not good economically, and it's not good for that sense of dignity of the human spirit. So that's kind of how I think about it, I think.
Chris, if I could just follow up and just take a minute or so. So you grew up in, working class family.
Yeah.
You entered conservative politics, working on Capitol Hill and so forth.
Yeah.
Republicans traditionally have not been associated with labor unions. Of course, you're part of a conservative think tank that is trying to change some of that. But for you, when was it when you were on Capitol Hill and you started thinking about labor unions? What happened there that you got to thinking about that? take about a
Well,
minute.
yeah, it's a great question. You're right, and I think, well, I'll say one other thing before I even answer that question, which is I think part of what's gone wrong on the right of center in this country, in my opinion, is that people forgot that conservative goals, the best of what conservative goals really are strong and healthy families, strong and thriving local communities, a strong national economy, and strong national defense. That none of those can be achieved just by letting workers fend for themselves in the marketplace. And so that's the argument we're making in DC, is that if you care about those truly conservative goals, the best of that conservative tradition, you must take worker power seriously. And that's why I know the way I'm talking doesn't sound like a traditional conservative, but I actually think it's deeply conservative. It speaks to the heart of what conservatism should really be about. And there was a moment maybe about 5 years ago, President Trump got elected. Everyone was confused. No one knew what it meant. And a lot of people in DC started wondering, what does this mean? What is going on? And both parties and everyone else were just trying to think through that. And I think in the chaos of all that, a lot of Republicans, or at least a few Republicans in DC, started to rethink some of that and say, you know what, if we really do believe in these conservative values, we're going to have to start taking worker power seriously instead of celebrating the decline of the labor movement, which I think is a huge mistake.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chris. And we'll come back to you, Maureen. Let's go to you. You're the president of a nurses union in Pennsylvania that's pretty new, relatively speaking, a couple decades old. Tell us about yourself. What are some life experiences that have shaped your perspective on this question?
So thank you very much. Yes, I am a nurse, and I've been a nurse for close to 40 years. And my experiences that have put me where I am today as far as unions are, I had a family that was very religious, and we were always service oriented. Hence the reason why I eventually became a nurse, as this was not my first career. And I did have family members that were union. My grandfather was Philadelphia Inquirer. He was a president there of the Inquirer. He was very active in the union. My first job was one of my first jobs. I was a union employee in a nursing home, and I was in high school at the time. And it was always exciting to be a union employee because there was better wages, there were protections, and my siblings were also worked in a factory in their teenage years and throughout high school, and they also worked for unions. And we were always very proud that we can support ourselves, be self-reliant, and meanwhile, also we worked with each other and communities, and we were all part of the community where we lived and how we treated each other. So being part of a union was a badge of honor when I was growing up. And then I switched, became worked actually in a political office at a local township, and I learned a little bit about politics during that time. I was not a union member, but what I did was I learned about corruption in local politics. And meanwhile, I was also in school. I was trying to decide, do I want to stay in this trajectory as a local township employee, or do I want to do something different? So I was taking courses, and I eventually decided that I need to step away from this political thing and become a nurse. So my father was also a deacon in the church, and so that was the way to go. We were service-oriented people, so becoming a nurse was even a bigger badge of honor. Actually, it was what I wanted to do. I just didn't know it, and I made it through, and I became a nurse. I went to a Catholic nursing school, and it was about service. And I love being a nurse. I still do today, 40 years later. But in the meantime, I learned that healthcare was not always about service and the healing mission, and what it was, the mission and value statement of the organization. And I started to see the business end of it, and I decided that, something is really wrong here. And I really wanted to have a voice for patient advocacy. I was always a patient advocate. And so what put me into a place where I really desired a union was unions, a nursing union started to really gain momentum in the 90s, and hospitals around me were organizing, and it was all around patient care, patient safety, and better um, working conditions for the nurses, but also to give the nurses an opportunity to have a good living. So at that point, I decided that unions were the way to go. A, it was a protective voice for the patient advocacy, and B, it helped elevate the nursing profession in many ways. So I decided to try to organize the hospital I worked in. That was unsuccessful. Then I made my way to a hospital that was organized, and they were nurses at Temple University Hospital, and that's where I still work today. And my main goal was to have a collective voice to advocate for patients, and eventually I was the local president and for many years, and I am now the state president for the past 5 years, which is PASNAP. And we have 10,000 members of healthcare workers and nurses in the state. And I still work at the bedside. And part of the reason, the question you have here is, do we need a new labor movement? I think we need a labor movement that looks like our union. And it's not because it's my union or the president there. It's because it's about the workers having power and not about the politics of, we're not that engaged in politics. We are, because we need to help get certain pieces of legislation passed, but which is part of our mission, but also because our workers are the union. And when I say that, I mean that because we were in a union. It was Pennsylvania State Education Association, PSEA, for a little bit of time when I first started. And those 4 years or 5 years, we were not represented. Our union was not representing the needs of our nurses and the needs of the patient advocacy portion of this. So we decided to leave PSEA, become our own independent unit, which we are today. We don't belong to a state, and we don't belong to a national. And we have 30 some locals in our state union, and we're a federation of unions, all independent. They're all independent locals, and they all belong to PASNAP. So we need to get back to that type of a model where the worker actually runs the union. Everyone in a local and their governing bodies, they are working in direct care, and everybody that sits on the state board of directors at PASNAP, they are working at the bedside, and they represent the organization. So if we do need a new labor union, I think we need to change the way that labor unions are today. And I'm very proud of the model that we have, because we have independent, autonomous locals that are supported by a state union. So, and all those locals have an opportunity to be on the state board and to represent one another. So if we do have a new labor union, I think it should look like PASNAP, because we are very independent in autonomous locals. And then we have a greater, the higher boards that, accept and understand and help foster those locals and to become part of the state as well.
So let me now ask you all about what you see as some common ground, maybe across the political spectrum, that could be had here when it comes to labor unions. And Chris, I want to start with you because you're working for a conservative policy organization. And so I'm interested, kick us off here. What is an action that you would support and that you think people on your side, on the conservative side, on the progressive side, can come together around when it comes to labor unions? What's some common ground that we can look for? Take about 3 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always easier when you're talking about common ground to talk about like what real people and different political views think, not what DC politicians think. It's real hard to find common ground with the politicians sometimes. So let's put them aside. We actually did some polling on questions related to this. And we found a mix of things that, like, kind of the institutional Republican Party and the institutional Democratic Party would both probably be upset with, but that the working class across the political spectrum really loved. And one of those ideas, for example, would be allowing worker controlled organizations like a union or another organization that workers control to administer benefits. So healthcare, training, I know some unions do that to some extent, but even beyond that, like say unemployment insurance. There are models in Europe where a worker controlled organization or a union will run health insurance, unemployment insurance, use taxpayer money, use employer money, use employee money, and that makes it way more accountable than, I mean, I used to work for a senator from Florida. During the pandemic, Florida's unemployment insurance system just totally collapsed. It had been underinvested in. It was accountable to no one, bureaucratic and hard to access. It wasn't funded adequately. And in some of these European countries that let worker organizations do that instead, it's way more transparent, it's way more responsive and accountable. And it's one of the reasons why so many people in those countries choose to join the union, because it has such a high value proposition. It really makes a lot of sense to join a union. There's a lot of benefit in it. You know, it's a place that you have a say in, that can administer your benefits, even if you change employers, your healthcare, your unemployment, your ongoing training, and these types of things can be looked after, and you have a say in how that organization is run. I think both progressives and conservatives should find something to love in that. That takes puts a lot of power in the hands of workers, and takes a lot of power away from government, which I think a lot of traditional conservatives would like, and a lot of power away from employers, where these are workers speaking for themselves and organizing for themselves. And especially, and this is where it gets tough in DC, especially if you add to that getting those organizations out of politics. I mean, the number one reason why more workers don't choose to join unions is because they think they're too partisan. A lot of research shows that. If you could tone down union involvement in politics and ratchet up their legal ability to do all these other things that they could do far better than the government ever could, you put that to the public, it's like 3-1 across the political spectrum. Working class people say they would support that and be excited about something like that.
Mark, let's go to you. What common ground do you see across the political spectrum when it comes to labor unions?
So I think too that you know, buying America, buying products that are built here in America, and I think that that is something that, you know, regardless of what letter follows behind your name, you want to see America to grow stronger. So you know, and something too is, you know, what Chris was just talking about, getting away from some of the politics. We've really tried to focus more on giving back to our communities, going back out into the communities for those people that are struggling in life, that are not making the good money and stuff, that we want to try to help them out. Come at Christmas time, come Thanksgiving time, even like if there is a bad storm, where we may have to go out, and Ford Motor Company may give us these trucks that they use for snow plows for the plants. We may go out and load up the trucks with debris to take it to a landfill to help out some of these elderly people, or people that are less fortunate, that are not able to get out and do some of that work. But I think too, showing that, you know, unions and companies can work together and they can do better things. But also too, let's broaden this out, and let's go back to making products here in America, and getting away from where we have so much import from other places. But that's the biggest thing that I would have to hit on is building product here in America.
And you mentioned unions and companies working together productively. Say just a little bit more about that.
So there's a thing actually that's going on in Louisville, Kentucky, that is called Bikes or Bust, and also Boxes of Love. And these are two events that what we do is we ask the community, anybody who would like to donate a bike. And we have this huge event at our union hall where we end up having thousands of bicycles donated. And then we turn around and we give those back out for the less fortunate, for these kids that don't have bikes. And then we started finding out that there's not just the kids, but you got a lot of adults that can go get a job if they had a bicycle that would allow them to go travel to the job to make money to eventually to hopefully get a house or an apartment or somewhere else to live. So we started that. The Boxes of Love is basically it's a dinner for four, and we come together and we start boxing up all this food, and we go out and we give it to different communities that are struggling down in projects, parts of Louisville and stuff is one of the places that we do. But we've had some corporate help from like places of UPS, Ford Motor Company, different other smaller companies as well that will help out and make donations, or even some of their salary people will come down and work shoulder to shoulder with an hourly person or a union person. So it just shows that you can work together and you're doing something, you're building up a community.
Maureen, what do you see as common ground when it comes to labor unions across the political spectrum?
A common ground is that we're all human and that we all need each other and that we all need to work together. Nobody that is on this call or that is a worker, we're not gonna be millionaires. We want to live a good, happy life, and we want to live a safe life. The common ground is that we're all workers. The common ground is that we all are in this together, whether you are working for the UAW or you're working as a nurse. We're all working together, and it's one common goal. And it's really, it's humanity. It's, you know, we have that goal of taking care of one another. And coming from a nurse's perspective, that's what we do. We need to be able to take care of one another and to share in wealth. And it's just basic human needs. It's the hierarchy of needs. And that's where I come from as in the work that I do. And you know, that's really what we need to focus on. And we come from we have 10,000 members in our union. It's a very small union. And really, we share in the governance of the organization. And that is what makes us thrive. We thrive as a union. We all have a common ground, and it's a humanitarian a voice in workers' rights, a voice in bettering each other. And that's really how I see it as unions, is that it's shared governance, as they say. And our union is a shared governance union. We have 30, we keep growing, 32 locals, and they all have independence, but they also follow the same mission. And our mission is really to take care of one another, to advance workers, to give them a basic, you know, standard of living, and really to make sure that we're taking care of each other. We are a healthcare union, and we want to take care of each other. So we have a strong shared governance, and that's really, I think we're grassroots in that, in what we do. And that's why, you know, I am so proud of what we are as a union, because I still work at the bedside. I still take care of people, and unions are to take care of one another. We're all in this together, and that's really the common ground that we have as an organization.
I would imagine that Chris was talking about the concern that many people have about labor unions is that the perception is that they've become too political. I heard you say in your comments that you basically agree with that, and you think that that's probably a point of common ground that you would see across the political spectrum with many.
Agreed. And you know, I don't know if we're too political, but we're a union, you know, of course, of caregivers, and we are involved in trying to advance legislation that would help patient care. So that's common ground. Everybody's going to be a patient, and it's, you know, we are somewhat political, but nowhere near the level of UAW or other organizations. We're very small, and we're a grassroots union, and we're healthcare workers. So the common ground is we need to take care of each other, and we don't have that hierarchy of a national or a state, you know, a national union. We're independent, and that's why we do what we do, and why we are so successful is because we have that common ground of care. And we are not that big, but I think we have something really going here in Pennsylvania, and it's called PASNAP. And it's not because I'm the president; it's because I'm a bedside worker, and that's first. And I'm a worker, and we all, we all are part of, this bigger fabric of workers and caregivers, right? We all take care of each other somehow. So that common ground is for us is that we all are independent, but yet we're together in the same common goal when it comes to workers' rights and to care, and when you're a caregiver, to take care of folks.
And I want to turn it over to Jerry. You've been listening to this, and I want to see before we go to the audience for open it up to the audience, I want to see if you've got a question or two for the speakers that is coming to your mind. And also just to note that one of the first speakers that was slated to speak, Skylar Lita, he's a non-union electrician. He was unable to join us because of work responsibilities. So unexpected work responsibilities, unable to join us. But we do miss his perspective and presence here. But Jerry, what questions are coming to your mind?
Not any really good ones at this point. I wanted to ask Mark, what do you see that has changed in the UAW in the last few years that has enabled you to organize the fight that you seem to be close to completing?
So I think the biggest thing is our membership was growing tired, and I think that just like what Chris was talking about, our membership declining. And I think leadership looked at this and said, there's got to be some changes that are going to happen. And I think when that process was just starting to go, the UAW experienced something that I don't want any union to ever have to go through, and that was corruption within ourselves. We had a few elite people, I guess, that decided that they wanted to get richer a little faster than the rest of us. So anyways, when we had to handle that situation, it really brought a lot of attention back to our union. Our membership was questioning a lot of things. A lot more people started showing up at union meetings, wanting to know what's going on. So it kind of put a fire back into our union. And when we went to the table this time in this round of negotiations, we elected a new president, and he was a little bit more too, as far as ready to take on the company and show them what they have made and where our members are, and where even your fast food restaurants were paying equivalent to a new hire at Ford Motor Company, at GM, or at Stellantis. So when he started talking to the membership and stating facts that he had seen, then I think it fired our membership up. And I think that's why you're starting to see a growth. And it's not just with our union; you see it with other unions across the nation as well.
All right. Well, Jerry, you good with us opening this up to the audience?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, let's hear from people in the audience here. And for this, we want to hear from a politically diverse group. So if you are raising your hand, just rename yourself. And just like Robin L has, she put a blue right next to her name there. Put red, blue, or other next to your name. Other meaning you don't lean either way. You don't. Red meaning you tend to lean conservative or tend to vote Republican. Blue meaning you tend to lean progressive or liberal and tend to vote Democratic. And other meaning you just don't lean it either way. So I want to now go to Robin and then Mike T. So Robin, would invite you to give your perspective on the question. Does America need a new labor movement, and what are some experiences that has shaped your perspective on this? Or you can ask one of the speakers a question. Go for it, Robin.
Thank you. I worked for over 20 years in the
and Robin, I'm sorry, before you
warehouse.
begin. Sorry, Robin, just again. and take up to 3 minutes to share your perspective, and I'll tell you when time is up. But go for it.
Okay, great. I spent over 20 years in the warehousing and distribution business. If you think about any large retailer in America, they have a warehousing business. If they're selling online, they have a distribution business. And these employees, we just beat the crap out of them. And it's ripe for organization. I will also tell you, having been on the management side, that these companies are terrified of unions. They do not want to share the wealth. And so 2 points from that. One is that it's really important that unions remain strong and alive, not just for the workplaces that have unions, but the threat of unionization is huge. We had warehouses in Virginia, for example, that would get 110 degrees. Think about the people that are working up in the cherry pickers up, 30 feet off the ground. It's easily 130 degrees up there. We got air conditioning for those people, not because corporate wanted to do it at all, but there was a threat of a union. So that's how they got air conditioning, and they would never have gotten it any other way. So I think that's really important. I also think these are workers that need our help. They need unions because they're being forced to work overtime, months at a time. This is where your shift is supposed to end at 5 o'clock. You're working until 7:30, and you may not even get a break where you can call your babysitter and see if you have childcare, month after month after month. My last point is that I think we need, I don't know if it would take a new labor movement, but a broadening labor movement. There are supposedly management employees at these corporations that work just even worse hours for even worse pay per hour. They're just beaten. I had supervisors who had 70 direct reports, and they were working 70, 75 hours a week in busy season. And they were supposedly supervisors because they supposedly had hiring and firing responsibilities, but it was clearly a move on the part of the corporations to try and make as many of people as they could in their employ exempt from potential unionization. Okay. So I think looking at some of those management positions would be useful.
All right, thank you, Robin. Let's go to Mike T. Mike, do you have a question, or did you want to share a comment?
Share a personal experience.
Go for it.
Thank you. So I have built a career out of helping things run better. And that's what I did postgraduate work on, which was actually trying to help nurses when they switched shifts on their shifts in patient care. It was my postgrad work. I worked a lot on basically creating a process or creating an optimization process for handing off patients between nurses, between shifts, so they can optimally do that without dropping the ball on any of their patients that they were involved for. Needless to say, the very first roadblock I ran into was working with the NNU. The NNU was a gigantic roadblock.
Sorry, for those of us who don't know, NNU, what is that?
The NNU is the, please correct me, I think it's the National Nurses United Union. And the first time I worked with them, they were a huge roadblock. We had all of this research, we had all of this work done and created to try to implement some change, or to try to look at some change, or just try to test it. I mean, honestly, we just wanted it tested. And the NNU said no. And basically it took months, even years, to try to get it in an NNU hospital. Conversely, we went to Texas Children's Hospital, which was not unionized. And we said, hey, we have this really good idea that we've done a ton of research on that we think will give better outcomes to your patients. Do you mind if we come in and try to give this a try? And they said, yes, absolutely. Better outcomes for our patients, we want that. So we went into Texas Children's and we implemented it. After a month, there was a statistically significant change in patient outcomes, in patient receptivity, I think is the correct word, in terms of patients coming back and needing care again. It took 2 years in the NNU hospitals for them to adopt the same exact policies. And I'm taking this from a different perspective, the perspective of safety. And my problem with unions as they are today, and I hope they can change in the future, even if there is a new labor union, is there are a lot of us, especially me, that have created careers and created a lifetime out of trying to help people work better, to be able to get better outcomes in their job, try to help them do their job faster and easier. And a union standing in the way and stopping me from being able to accomplish that is beyond reproach in my mind. Thank you.
Mike, thank you very much. Very relevant, and thank you for sharing your experience on that. I want to see if there's somebody who doesn't lean red or blue who wants to ask a question or make a comment. If not, Frank, is that you? Yeah, go for it, Frank.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle. I used to be part of a union, not anymore. But my question to the union presenters, when I was part of it, the people that worked hard were never rewarded. And the people that were lazy, and we knew who those people were never really dealt with properly, which kind of brought the morale of the whole system down. So how do you deal with rewarding people who deserve that reward when they're part of the system?
Frank, do you mind sharing which union you were a part of?
I'm in Detroit, so it was UAW at one point.
Gotcha. All right. Mark, Chris, Maureen, anyone want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll take it at first if you don't mind. So, I guess the first thing I'd want to say, Frank, is, there's whenever anybody puts in guidelines, you're always going to have abuse into any system. It doesn't matter what it is. And I think, I used to take a very serious role when I was on the shop floor and I was walking my area. And when it became clear that there was one issue, that this one person seemed to be a problem, whatever, I kind of took it as a challenge to find out what was going on. Sometimes it might have been mental health. There might have been other things going on at home. So it may come down to that this person needed additional attention to get them up on board. So I know what you're saying as far as you're always going to have one or two here and there that play the system, that you're getting some type of favoritism, or they'll get by with something, whatever. And I always try to stop that as well. And it was very hard to try to prevent. You had a lot of times you would even have management that would actually try to encourage some of that, trying to get some information back, and maybe some way to cut out a job or something to that effect. But as far as reward, we've started a system now that if somebody does something outstanding, they actually get called up. We have a meeting every Monday morning at 7 a.m. All the management's around, and we actually will bring a person over that has done something that we feel like is outstanding, to just kind of, lift up morale, like you were saying. But, with the rules that we have in play, and, the union and the company, that's what you're going by is the contract, and those are a set of rules. So sometimes you can't, break those rules to go after somebody who's abusing the system. And you kind of really management has to be the one to be the bad guy to say, I'm going to do something here. And then the union can step back and say, you know what, you were in the wrong, or you was in the right, one or the other. But that's a touchy situation. It is. And I know I've heard the same comments from my members, as well as, you know, this person seems to get by with stuff. But I always took it as a challenge. I wanted to, because I didn't like that. I didn't like somebody abusing the system, nor did I like somebody that was trying to get ahead of the game and outsmart somebody by getting something that they shouldn't be getting either. So it's just it's a constant problem that we live in today's society. It's no different inside those plants. But I appreciate you your time that you put in up there in Detroit, brother.
Chris and Maureen, do you want to weigh in just 30 seconds or so?
Yeah, I would just say that I think a whole bunch of people share the same concern and question. I mentioned some of that polling research we did in the past, and the perception of union involvement in partisan politics was the number one reason why workers said they might not vote for a union. But also really high on that list was the perception that unions defend bad employees. So, I mean, I think what Mark is sharing just seems to be totally essential if the labor movement is going to succeed. It's going to need to speak exactly to that question, because you're not the only one asking it. That's pretty high on the list for a whole bunch of working people. When if they do happen to have a negative impression of unions, that's high on the list of why.
Well, I just have to say that nurses are the most trusted profession in this country for the past 25 years. And part of the reason of that is that we work at a very high standard, and we're held to the highest accountability of any profession, physicians, any other profession in the country. So, yeah, and so I have to say that we hold each other accountable as nurses. We stick together, and we, you know, to your point is that we nurses, again, we work very, very hard, and we don't have, you know, we don't have the luxury of falling down on the job, because if you fall down on the job, there's going to be somebody right next to you making sure that you move out of the way and we get what we need done, because we save lives, we take care of patients, and we are held to a very high standard. So nurses just don't get away with, we hold it together. We are there 24/7. And I do know, even just with the state of Pennsylvania, and I sit on the state board of nursing calls, and they put out a high standard. We're held to a higher standard than any other worker in this country, even physicians. So I know that because I do it. And you know, I understand where you know there's this concern, but you know, when somebody codes,
Think about 15 more seconds, Maureen.
okay, when a patient is coding and dying, you have a team of people that are going to do everything they can. So we're held to a very high standard, being the #1 trusted profession in this country for 25 years by the polls. So yeah, I just have to say that.
Joan White, I believe I know you, and I believe that you lean blue. So it's time for us to call on somebody who leans blue. If that's you, Joan, go for it.
That's me. Okay. All right. First, I'd like to say that I spent 20 years in the restaurant industry, non-union, and 19 years as a nurse in the ER, and I wasn't unionized, as I told Jerry before. We were told that if we mentioned union, we would be fired. But in all my 42 years of working outside the home, I found that there are people who work hard, and there are people who don't work as hard. So I don't think, Maureen, I loved my profession. It was really a vocation, but there are lazy nurses, even in the ER. Okay, and I wanted to bring up two stories. One is, there was a documentary, partially Barack Obama had something to do with the production. It was called American Factory. Do you know it, Dave? Because it was centered on a factory in Dayton, Ohio.
Oh, I think I did see that. Yes.
Okay. So what happened there is the workers, I don't remember why the company failed, but it was bought by the Chinese. So I'm going to cut it short. I'm going to just put it in a nutshell. The workers went from making $30 an hour to $14, an hour under the Chinese leadership. And when they tried to form a union, they were threatened. So they were not able to unionize. And the other thing I wanted to say was that, so that's American Factory, if anyone is interested. And the other thing is, I heard Sean Fain from United Auto Workers speaking on television the other day, and he pointed out two things that stuck with me. One is that there is much there. The plan is to have worker participation in the unions rather than union bosses. So they want to keep the unions clean. And also, and someone else alluded to this, maybe it was Robin, I'm not sure. As soon as the union workers struck a deal, Toyota started paying, who is non-union, started paying their workers $9 more an hour. So, yeah. So,
All right.
so it helps even the non-union jobs. And thank you.
Thank you, Joan. And
Okay.
now let's go to, it's time to hear from a red, and that's you, Rita. Rita, go for it.
Okay, thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone that's shared here, because I I'm drinking all this in, but I do want to say that one of the things that I have found, and we have had discussions on this in our forum in the past, and one of the things that I think, I can't speak for everyone else, but I do think it might be a more conservative perspective, is that just exactly what I think Frank brought up, or I'm sorry, I don't recall who brought up the fact that there are people that are did the way that it was expressed within the conversation. And Jerry, I think you'll remember this because we talked about it, was that the union tended to it's not the union itself, but people would hide behind the union at times because they didn't want to do the quality of work, but they had the union behind them to fight for them if they got called out or whatever. Now, something that was really shocking to me, and I know this is really not a fair comparison, but when I found out that teachers, once they're tenured, if it's still the same, and I don't know that it is, but my understanding was that teachers are tenured after 2 years, and it's very difficult to get rid of a bad teacher. And
Right.
I'm sorry. Did
Oh,
someone?
I just said, sorry, I said right. Sorry. I'm
Oh,
going to
okay.
mute myself again.
That's all right.
You are right.
And that was something that was so disappointing to me, because of the fact that these are our children. My children, and of course kids complain, right? So we don't always take at face value what they might have to say, but I know I've experienced bad teachers. And when I say bad teachers, they're just people that aren't really, their hearts aren't there really. So I think that so much of what y'all talked about, every single one of you, I thought, oh, that is so wonderful. Your attitudes. One of the things that I would say to Mark, and this is what I think, you've got a leader within the union. Why don't we have to change the mentality somehow? It's that, nobody wants to have to call out people, right? But what if you had what if you had more than one, or, I don't know, a committee or something that could help management to talk to people that are falling down, and I don't even know that that's right. But what I'm saying is, I think that there's that sense of not being held responsible and being able to hide behind the power. And that happens in all walks of life. But I think that's one of the things that I'd love to hear y'all address.
Okay. And let's actually just keep on going and hear from some other people in the audience, but duly noted, Rita. Let's go to somebody who doesn't lean red or blue, and I believe that's you, Len. Len, you're up.
Yeah, I'm just curious. It's odd to me that unions have been more of a Democrat phenomenon, or supported by Democrats, and yet working class people are increasingly Republican. I don't know, since, you know, why aren't Republicans becoming more pro-union? Or why aren't unions becoming more pro-Republican?
Chris, do you want to take a first shot at this?
Yeah, happy to. So I guess there's two things I would say. One is, I think you're seeing some encouraging signs that some Republicans are becoming a bit more open to unions, as I said earlier, that as I think they should. You saw Senator J.D. Vance with the Teamsters president the other day talking about the yellow trucking company's bankruptcy and how threatening that's going to be to a whole bunch of drivers. You see a whole bunch of other Republican senators trying to do a similar thing, and it's you know, it's baby steps, I think, at this point. But here in D.C., you do see a lot more interest than you would have seen 5 or 10 years ago, I think. Um, and likewise, I think there's some openness from some of those unions as well. Like Mark was saying, like it's a losing proposition to kind of double down totally on one party, especially if in the building trades union, the bunch of guys who make stuff, that's going to be 50-50 Republican Democrat everywhere in the country. You know, the building trade unions membership, not the leadership in DC, but membership was like 50-50 Trump Clinton in 2016, 50-50 Trump Biden in 2020. You know, the working class is politically diverse, and I feel like some Republicans are starting to see that, and I think at least at the membership level, there's a lot of interest in a more kind of welcoming union environment as well from the members. The only other thing I would say, and David, you can tell me to stop talking anytime, but I think one of the other problems that the conservatives have had is we kind of swallowed this free market fundamentalism in the 1980s, where Reagan came along and told us how we were going to get out of our economic slump. And fair enough, maybe he had a point at the time, but we've been doing this thing in America for like 40 years. We kind of let the free market do whatever it wants. And that's worked out really bad for workers, because once you start treating workers as if they're just the same as any other, you know, input, you know, to make something, what do you need? Steel, you need computer chips, you need workers, and, you know, the economic analysis will treat all that the same. And so you start downsizing, you start offshoring, you start replacing, you start trying to get these inputs as cheaply as you can. And that's fine if you're talking about steel or chips or whatever, but if you're talking about people, that gets real dehumanizing real fast. And I think what conservatives need to wake up to is that mindset, that the free market will take care of it if you just leave it alone, has not worked out terribly well for working class people. And you do see that changing, I think, a little bit in DC. Not enough yet, but it is changing.
I want to ask Mark or Maureen to weigh in on the second part of Len's question, is, which I think was, will we or are we seeing unions become more Republican? Like, are your unions politically diverse? What do you see, Mark and Maureen?
I'll speak to that. Yes, ours is politically diverse, the nurses union, because it's not about Republican or Democrat. It's really about patient advocacy. And our product is patients. So, you know, most of what we do as a nurses union and a healthcare union, we're not just nurses. We work towards better working conditions for the nurses and healthcare workers, which ultimately trickles down to the care that the patient is going to receive, and outcomes are better. So yes, you know, this is really a little bit different when we're talking about patient care, and nurses are held to a very high standard, the highest standard than any other profession as far as when it comes to care. We need to be held to a higher accountability. So, you know, again, my product is patient outcomes and care of the patient. So for me, you know, healthcare unions are what we need to advocate for patients and people. These are people. So,
and the reality is that however you're doing it, you're getting a politically diverse group of people, membership.
We do have a politically, yes, and it's all about patients. We do, at least in our union, we have a very high we have a very diverse, we have 10,000
Mm.
members, so, yep.
Mark, just invite you to weigh in 30 seconds to a minute on Len's questions.
So in the UAW, the way we actually have the process of going through an endorsement is we send out a questionnaire to each candidate. And what I've learned, like I said at the very beginning, was education, and that falls on both sides, our membership along with the politicians. I know if I give a politician a questionnaire, a lot of times, if they're a typical Republican, they won't even turn it back in. Now, there's been several Republicans that will call me and say, I don't understand this question. What does it mean? And then if I get into the explaining what those questions are and what they mean and how they affect our membership, I've learned that it's like educating them. And they go, well, wait a minute, I am for that. I have no problems with that. I can stand with you guys on those issues. And that's a common issue that you was talking about earlier. It's like it's education on both sides. And our membership, we keep telling our members, we're not endorsing, I'm sorry, a candidate because they're a Democrat or Republican or whatever. We vote for them. We're endorsing them. We're asking you to vote for them because of the issues and where they stand with labor issues. And that's where we push our political agenda.
All right. Let's go to Barb. Barb, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry. So I think the reason we need to continue having unions is because we can't rely on the benevolence of management or the owners to protect workers or pay a living wage. I worked at the University of Minnesota when we were going through a process to join a union, and we had 1,800 people in our local voted to join ASME, which is a public employee. And part of the reason is because the way people were treated on the job, including raises and promotions, varied by what department they were in. If you were lucky enough to be hired by the right person, you're lucky to make that benefit. But if you weren't, you're kind of out of luck. Currently, I work for Hennepin County, which is the largest county in Minnesota. And all the employees from snowplow drivers up to mid-level management are union. And I think that it's important because the gains that unions make help everyone. And also, I just find this so disgusting. The state of Iowa passed a law that said that people that are age 14 can work more than a certain amount of time. And it was supported by the packing plants that can't get anybody to work there. So now they're going to have 14-year-olds in a packing plant. This is very dangerous. So that's my statement.
All right, thank you, Barb. And now I want to call on somebody who leans red. Mike T, I know we've heard from you. If there's anybody else who leans red and hasn't had a chance to speak, I want to invite you to raise your hand if you want to say something. If not, I will call on you again, Mike T. Going once, going twice. Mike T, back to you.
Thank you very much. I figured I would represent since I was in the minority here. So I will share another personal experience, and thank you, Chris. I think unions are good for workers. I think they're bad in other places. And again, I will beat the safety drum again. I apologize for the second story, but I do think it is incredibly important. Like I said, in my career, I've gone through manufacturing facilities. In a lot of cases, I've been into aerospace manufacturing, and I've been in wood manufacturing. And in the aerospace manufacturing, venue, when I work there and go through their plant and pick out optimizations and things that they can do, one of the biggest things I always point out on the very first factory walkthrough is safety. This needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. This is wrong. You really ought to look at this. And that's not only a sales pitch for myself trying to get the job, but that is also, to me, my moral imperative that I am able to pick out those kind of things very quickly and easily on a manufacturing floor to see if they need to be corrected. And at Lockheed, or sorry, I shouldn't be mentioning names. I apologize. In the aerospace industry, you did not hear me say that. In the aerospace industry, they weren't able to put together any of those ideas or any safety concerns after a first walkthrough and after I got hired until years later. And actually, they had people hurt on exactly the types of things that I pointed out. And they were hurt because the union was standing in the way and wouldn't allow, and the union would not allow things to change that were clearly safety problems. Now, in comparison, I went to the wood industry as well and did the same exact thing. I went through, did a plant walkthrough, and pointed out things that I thought were unsafe. Again, not only just to sell myself for the job, but also a moral imperative. And before I even was hired on the first day, though all of the safety things that I pointed out were fixed. Management saw and heard what I said. The people on the floor heard and saw what I said, and they immediately fixed it. And when I worked there in the wood industry, I constantly came up with new optimizations and new ways to work to help people work better, faster, and also help them work easier, ergonomics, human ergonomics, be able to have less repetitive stress injuries, be able to get the kind of care that they need as an employee to be able to work there. And in the wood industry, there was absolutely zero talk of unionizing. And that was even before they hired me, there was zero talk of unionizing.
And take about 15 more seconds, Mike.
It was simply the ethics of the company that was putting it through. So again, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for sharing those stories. I want to go to Harold. Harold told me that he doesn't lean red or blue, and that's the kind of person we're looking for right now. So go for it, Harold. And unmute yourself, Harold. Oh, Harold, go ahead and unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
I appreciate what Mike T just said. I go back 50 plus years to when I was first starting off as a field engineer in construction. And at the time, almost all construction was unionized. And on the different projects that I worked, I found that the real issue that came about that probably decimated the unions was that they had too much power. And they could control an awful lot of the work for the work procedures that went on during construction. And that caused a serious revolution by the constructors. And little by little it became, unions are no good. And so I see that as right now the pendulum has swung much too far in the wrong direction, and as unions became something that to be avoided, not to be used, bad word, the actual wages of the middle class has been decimated. And I think you saw that in the UAW strike, where I don't think it was where some of the non-union automakers, and it wasn't $9 an hour, it was $11 an hour, raised their wages to put off unionization. And so I think that really there needs to be we talk about, does there need to be a new labor movement? And I think the answer is yes. Okay. I think that if we could get behind unions, that would give the worker a stronger voice. But then at the same time, the power that used to be invested in the unions has to be somehow kept under control. Just too much power is, right now the employers have the majority of the power, and that's not good. And so I think there needs to be a shift back, and it needs to come in the laws that we write, the attitudes we have toward unions, but it also has to come in how unions are managed. And it may be in laws that we have to write that somehow limit the power of the union as they grow to the point that they don't have the absolute voice that they had 50 years ago. And I believe that it can be done. I'm just not quite sure how yet. But I do know that right now I support greater unionization because with it comes higher wages, but then the American public itself has to accept the fact that things will get more expensive. And that's going to be fact.
Harold, take 15 more seconds.
Well, I could go on for quite a while longer. But and so, to sum it up is that too much power invested in either group is not the right way to do this. That there has to be a middle ground and a way to compromise a lot of the things that have gone on in the past and have gone on in the present.
All right. Thank you, Harold. And I want to thank everyone for weighing in here. Unfortunately, we won't have time to hear from everybody who has their hand up. We have to, we want to respect everyone's time and end this meeting on time. So before we close, I'm going to ask our first speakers to just go around and say what they're taking away from this conversation. But before we did that, I'm going to ask Apple or Len, if you could just again put into the chat the feedback form that people can fill out. We would like to hear your feedback on this We the People's Forum, and hear your ideas on future topics and questions that we would pursue and hear from everyday Americans at these We the People's Forums. And our next one is going to be in January, and we're going to hear from a couple of Iowa and New Hampshire everyday American Republican voters on who they think the next Republican nominee for president should be. So we'll hear from some people who are voting for different candidates. For now, I want to say that if you're new to Braver Angels or you're not a member, I want to invite you to join. Join as a member. It's only $12 a year. Go to braverangels.org/join, and you'll be invited to our convention this summer, which is going to be in Kenosha, Wisconsin in June 27th to the 29th. It's in Kenosha because the Republican National Convention is in Milwaukee and the Democratic National Convention is in Chicago. And guess what's right smack in the middle of those two places? Kenosha! So that's where we'll be. And we'd love to see many of you there. But join as a member, braverangels.org/join. And let's now go to our first speakers. And let's just hear from you about what are you taking away with you from our conversation today. And just take, 30 seconds to a minute. What are you taking with you from our conversation today? And let's go Maureen, Chris, and then Mark. Maureen.
Hey, okay. What I'm taking away is that there are challenges around healthcare unions and unions in general. I do believe that unionization is the way to go, especially the model that we have at PASNAP, which is a member-driven union. And we have autonomous locals, and we are the people that run the union are the people that are working at the bedside. So for me, the takeaway here is that I believe in our model where you must be in direct care to lead the organization, and I believe healthcare unions are the way to go. The nurses and healthcare workers that are organized can make a better patient experience and have better outcomes. So again, I will always have my heart towards a union because I worked very hard and fought for a union and to be an independent union. And we don't belong to a bigger group, but I believe this independent function that we have as a member-driven union is the way to go when we are looking at unions in the future.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for this. Chris, what are you taking away with you from this conversation?
I'm taking away number one that Braver Angels is as great as I always thought it was. It's not, and maybe I'm just jaded because of the town I live in, but it's not that often that you have a respectful exchange of views with a very politically diverse group. So I appreciate that and appreciate all of you just for that. It's refreshing for someone in my line of work. I'm also taking away that I think people want DC to be more creative on these issues. That on the one hand, yes, I heard a lot of sympathy for the need for workers to have more voice and power in the workplace to be able to claim the better wages that they deserve and better conditions. It seems like a lot of agreement on that, and also like a fair amount of concern about some of the ways that we've traditionally gone about trying to do that. That might need to change and evolve and get refreshed. So I'm taking away that I better keep going to work and try to be creative on some policy solutions that can square the circle on that.
And Mark, you get the last word.
So before I get into what I was going to take away, there was a couple of things I know that Mike T had brought up about the health and safety inside the plants, and
I'll be
I
right
wanted to
back.
let you know that we actually have UAW has health and safety representatives even in aerospace inside those plants, and it's really disturbing to me to hear that if you actually came in and pointed out a health and safety issue, that the UAW rep would not take it upon themselves to actually investigate and find out if there was something they could do to fix that. So that is kind of alarming. And this is great. I mean, to have this open dialogue like this and stuff, it's things that I like to hear as well. Being a representative and representing a lot of different, I guess, areas within the UAW. So that's good. And then also too, I wanted to say on Harold, you had said something about the cost of things going up. With when you have higher wages that come up, the cost of things will go up. And I wanted to point out that at Ford Motor Company, 10% of everything they make pays this contract right now that we have under UAW Ford. 10% of everything they make is what they're paying their members. The other 90% goes back to the CEOs to do with investments or however they see fit to do. So don't always believe things. This is what I was talking earlier about being educated. You know, I could be tailored to look at a certain way if I keep getting the same message over and over. But you know, make sure you read up on things. And I'm going to be doing the same thing. And I appreciate being a part of this group, hearing everybody's perspective, and glad I was able to contribute a little bit to that. But thank each and every one of you guys for being on here tonight. Thank you.
Well, and what I'm taking away is we heard from a politically diverse group here in the audience. We heard from an established person who's a regional leader for an established union like the UAW, the president of a pretty new union like the PASNAP, and Chris Griswold, who's coming from conservative policy circles on Capitol Hill. And hey, look at the conversation we had here. So we can do better, America. And look forward to continuing the conversation, and let's go out there and build a house united. Take care, everyone. Good night.